Good evening, everyone, and welcome to I2E2. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Alyson Bergner, and I am the Program Assistant at the Mitchell West Center for Social Inclusion, and I am so excited to be here with you tonight as we kick off the second and final night of our virtual I2E2 webinar series. First and foremost, I would like to thank School of the Arts as our co-sponsors for this event, including Director Terrance Brown, Vanessa Borelli-Vega, Monica Collier, Megan Mercier, and all of those involved in tonight's production. If you are new to us tonight, I2E2 stands for Ignite, Inspire, Educate, and Engage. Tuesday night, we held an amazing panel where we had a candid conversation on overcoming obstacles with boldness. Each artist on the panel shared parts of their history, and they talked about the importance of being unapologetic, not only in your art, but also in your life, and how being yourself leads to true liberation and the ability to take up space, break down walls, and shatter glass ceilings. I'll be honest with you, I logged off feeling overwhelmed, but inspired and truly ignited. If you missed it, I urge you to watch it. It is live on SODA's YouTube page. Tonight, though, we welcome our panelists back for Preaching to the Choir, where our panelists will address educating folks outside of creative careers so that everyone can understand the value of the arts. We will have 50 to 60 minutes of uninhibited and provocative discussion and 20 to 30 minutes for the Q&A. We encourage you all to submit your questions by using the Q&A feature that will be open for the duration of the event. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, four-time individual World Slam Poetry Champion, Mr. Ed Mabrey. It should be noted that he was the first person of color to win that championship. He is an artist, he is a creator, he is an entrepreneur, and he is revered within the creative expression. Ed was the keynote speaker for our inaugural I2E2 event in 2019, and it was just so good that we had to invite him back. And without further ado, I hand this evening over to Mr. Ed Mabrey.
And now, how about that? Okay, sorry about that. Delay and everything. So hi again. Thank you for coming out today and being part of this online experience. If you missed the first, you missed something really great. So we're going to jump right into this one. We have a little bit of time. If you have questions, feel free to post those. You don't have to save them until the end. You might forget them. Make sure you write them down in advance so we can make sure to handle everything and answer all your questions. And we're going to make sure to save a little extra time for this one so all the panel members and myself can actually address your questions. We're going to jump right into this one. Once again, today you have the infamous one and only Obbie West is with us today. Want to thank him for being part of this event today. Obbie West is a father, is a Army vet, is a attended college, is a professional spoken word poetry artist who, as of late, has had a serious focus in the niche regarding mental health, emotional health, and wellness, and also sexual awareness as well, as it pertains to assault, but also sexual awareness as individuals. to help combat patriarchy, toxic masculinity, etc. We also have with us Ms. Darendra Wolfe, a wonderful individual from Lower South Carolina. Darendra Wolfe is a Black woman. She is a mother of two. She's one of those being a cancer survivor, so amen to that. She's also a college attendee and also an Army vet as well. Also an artist, multi-disciplinary artist in poetry. She's also an educator on the K through 12 level and also post-grad level as well. She does tutoring. So amazing writers, amazing performers, and amazing human beings. So we're here today to jump into the next section of questions. We're discussing things from the perspective of being a creative professional. And what that means in terms of just, it's a very nice way of calling yourself an artist, but meaning that you've put in the time, whether it's your Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours to be considered a professional or an experienced person. You put in the time to be considered an expert in your field. So at that point, you kind of become a creative professional, because it simply means that whatever it is, if it's something that requires creation, then it's something that these people and myself can handle doing within the realm of the arts and even beyond. So discussing how the importance of being a creative professional, what it means to be one in this current COVID and quote unquote post-COVID society, what it means to be one here in America, more to the point, what it means to be one as a BIPOC, so a Black, Indigenous person of color. Three of us all identify as Black on that spectrum. So what it means to be a Black creative, navigate the waters, academic and regular world and government and collegiate and in your performance areas, demographically across the board from coast to coast. So that's pretty much what we're touching on. And today's very special because the questions that have been pre-selected are going to kind of cover and discuss how we approach those things as individual artists, but how we also allow ourselves to become invasive to get into those areas that we normally are not allowed in, to show the value and worth, not of us as individuals, but of the art forms which we represent. So to give the other two panel members, I'm going to pose a question and then give my very short response to it, and then turn it over to one of them to kind of come back with their viewpoint in it as well. So for the first one, let's say we'll start off with myself, and then Obbie West, and then Darendra Wolfe, and then for the next will be myself, and then reverse the order on that. The first question is, how have you been able to cultivate your message to expand beyond your following? The question, the first one we're handling today is, how have you been able to cultivate your message to expand beyond your following? When I take the word cultivate, or when I hear the word cultivate, what comes to mind is in terms of being a gardener. So it's more a matter of cultivating is, how are you planting the seeds to grow, right? So if you look at it from that aspect of being a planter, then you can't plant seeds that you're always going to have to stand over yourself and watch, that you're going to have to water, that you have to provide the sunlight for. You want to make sure that you're cultivating a thing where it grows beyond you. The first step in doing that is determining that you have a message. What is your message? My particular message is a concept called the human stain, which just simply means emotion. The one thing we all have in common, no matter our race, color, creed, everything, is emotions. We all feel. So I've always believed that if I can tap into your feelings with my work, then in turn, I can get you to see things from a perspective outside of your own. If I just simply get down to you discussing a feeling, then you can see the rightness of something, the wrongness of something, the justice in something, etc. So for me, cultivating the message to expand beyond my following has been first to decide what my message is. And if my message is that love can eventually conquer all, so we need to learn how to put love in the forefront of our conversations, be they artistic, political, then we should be able to hear each other better. So that's been my particular one in terms of cultivating a message to expand beyond my following, because a following can be your tribe, your group, your community, your fan base, things of that sort. So your following isn't something necessarily that you create or determine. Your following is determined based upon the message that you share. I think the more universal the message, then by default, the bigger your following can be, because more people can buy into your actual message. So that's my response to it. We're going to bring Mr. Obbie West on board if Obbie's here.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you for the introduction, Ed, and good seeing you.
Almost definitely likewise. So we'll present the same question. How have you been able to cultivate your message to expand beyond your following?
Okay, well, I'm approach this from two perspectives. I'm approach it first from the marketing standpoint, which is going to be pretty universal with any business. I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to find your target audience. And oftentimes your target audience may not be where you are. And they may be in places where what you do hasn't been introduced, right? So my target audience may be in a hospital, but poetry isn't something that you normally find in a hospital. There's not a poetry office next to the cafeteria, right? So you have to now figure out how to introduce yourself to that target audience so that you can go where they are, because they're not always going to come to you, especially if they don't know you exist. So you have to find your target audience and may have to go to your target audience. The second thing is ads, of course. And I won't spend a lot of time on this. It's all pretty common sense, ads. There's ways that you can promote yourself on social media platforms and things of that nature that spread your message out to a broader audience. And then there's consistency. Consistency is very, very, very important. Most of us are victims of consistency. If you see a commercial that advertises a certain thing, styrofoam cups, you see this company, styrofoam cups, and they say it all the time. And you don't need styrofoam cups, but even though you don't need it, they're letting you know that they exist. So the second that you determine you need styrofoam cups, the first thing that's going to come to your mind is that company, because of the consistency. They've always put themselves in your face. So consistency is very important. Now, the most important part of this question, if I approach this from a messaging standpoint, I think you have to speak it plain. Especially as poets, oftentimes we write in a way that we understand, especially if we're referencing a past experience. We may use some references that attach to that experience, and only us and the person involved in that experience may know. To anyone else, this poem may seem sort of abstract, which is okay, because poetry is first for liberation. However we want to write it in order to find that liberation is fine. But when we determine that the intent for this particular poem is to go out to the masses to send a message, is no different than a news broadcaster. We have to put this in a language that can be understood. We got to put this in a language that can be understood by the masses. I believe a message understood is just as effective as silence, right? So we have to put this in a way that it's understood. Next, I think we have to speak with sincerity. People can detect when something is not authentic. When something's not authentic, I don't care how true it is, it's not going to be followed. Right? That's why people leave churches. You can have a pastor that's standing in the pulpit and he can say all the right things because he has the study guide, right? The Bible, he has the study guide, so he knows what to say. But if what he's saying isn't authentic, those members will leave, even though what he's saying is true. So there has to be some authenticity with the messaging. It just can't be something you're saying because you learned it. It has to be something you're feeling. And people will feel that feeling. And once that happens, they'll share your message to other like-minded people. And before you know it, your reach will start to go beyond those who is identified as your initial following. So if you're authentic and you're sincere about it, they'll share it with other like-minded people, and your audience will begin to grow and grow and grow and grow. Next thing I think is very important, not to be afraid to journey into a place where you don't belong. And don't belong doesn't necessarily mean you've been banned from that place. It just may mean that you've never been introduced to that place, so they don't know that there's a place for you there. Like right now, I do poetry for advocacy. I talk about sexual assault and harassment prevention, domestic violence, mental health. And before, when I did poetry, it was for entertainment. Now, for educational purposes, I go to federal government, military organizations, and colleges, places where they were always trained by lecture. Now it's by an art form. So that's a place that before I didn't belong, until they realize that the way that this information is presented can be very helpful to the people who are listening. So you can't be afraid to journey into a place you don't belong. And lastly, don't be afraid to be something different. Don't feel like you have to conform to the circles that you're going to be surrounded by. It's absolutely important that you present something different. This is as much of an oxymoron as this may sound. Understanding something, introducing something different brings understanding. right? If I have a different perspective, this person has a different perspective, and I don't agree with their perspective, or I don't agree with how they are. Once they explain their perspective, it gives me understanding of why they're that way, the catalyst, and now there can be some type of unity. Like I would love to hear a person write a poem about why they're racist. I would love it. It might help me understand why they have a problem with me. At that point, I might not have such a problem with them. So bring something different, and that difference may help me understand why you are where you are, which may bring us together. So this is the things that I think we can do that will reach our audience, who will in turn send our message to somebody else, and that will continue to happen. And then eventually we'll end up reaching a broader audience outside of our initial circle. Hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Thank you. That was Mr. West. Ms. Wolfe, if you'll come on board with us, please.
Hello.
Hello, and I'll
Okay.
repeat the question for you just so you have it in advance.
Oh, okay.
How have you been able to cultivate your message to expand beyond your following?
Okay, so the first thing is that, well, Mr. Mabrey, you were talking about cultivating and how it reminded you of planting seeds. And so when I heard that, one of the things that I was already getting ready to say was that I believe that I am the seed. So when you were talking about when you're speaking or when you go out, it is like you're planting a seed. I believe I am the seed that God spit forth to be planted. And so now it's time for me to bloom and fruit and be fruitful and multiply. So I believe that I am the seed. So everywhere I am is an opportunity to provide conversation with people who don't look like me. The Creator created me to create things that point back to Him. So He has endowed one with not just me with this gift, but everyone here who's on the Zoom and in the world, creatives. We're meant to do one of 5 things. And one of those 5 things are prophesy, teach, encourage, serve, and lead. I believe that professional creatives, these people possess all 5 characteristics, and they go through a process to cultivate that message. Well, I know I did, to become a living sacrifice for the edutainment of the masses. So we're prophets who promote promises to the spirit for the future of a people whose flesh struggle to comprehend the purpose and now. So we do that through poetry, through comedy, through literature, through music, the visual arts. The new creative professional is able to teach, encourage, serve, and lead in a way that most religious institutions only speak of. Obbie West spoke of how people are leaving the church in droves because it feels unauthentic. People don't believe that the pastor believes what he's saying. And you spoke of on Tuesday how open mics, for you, they became a sort of church. They became a sort of place where you came and it was cathartic for you. So the creative professional is able to lead and encourage, like I said, in a way that only most religious institutions only speak of. So someone much more famous than I once said that sometimes we're the only Bibles that people will ever see. And you may be the only glimpse of God a person will ever get. So for us, I believe we have a duty to carry, shoot, shield, and conceal the messages that the Creator's placed in us, messages that speak truth to power. They inform, they educate, they open minds to different perspectives, because more often than not, people are not seeking confirmation and validation from, this is weird these days, they're not seeking validation and confirmation from the real world, but from this 4-dimensional construct of social media. Culture and public opinion have become the gauge many measure their worth by. So instead of focusing on the work set before you and seeking ways to do it in excellence, the creative professional is not simply an artist traveling the world to speak. It could be anyone. It could be a mom, it could be a dentist, a student, anyone that's taking time to do what they do in excellence and not following the crowd. That's how you reach beyond where you are right now. Anyone at any time who decides to serve the human spirit rather than the human and excellence in spite of any ridicule or opinion. So to preach beyond the choir, to preach beyond, to take and cultivate my message of a single Black woman with 2 children, cancer survivors, deep faith, raised in the South. As a new creative, it's important to understand what my mission is, which is tell the truth no matter who it hurts, or no matter what, and no matter how it hurts you, or no matter if it hurts you. But it first has to work in you. Mr. West talked about how again, being authentic to the message. You can research and you can read and you can hear someone else's perspective on something, but if you don't know it and you haven't experienced it yourself and you haven't taken the time to be in that fight and that struggle, it has to work in you first. I think that's another reason why people leave the churches in droves, is because the message hasn't worked in the pastor. And so he's up there talking about something, or not just him, her too. Pastors are up there speaking about something that they haven't experienced and telling people don't, when they do. And so for a creative professional, we don't have that barrier of trying to be perfect. And that also helps cultivate our message. Faith plus work equals an opportunity to connect with people beyond my community and tribe, as a mother, as a daughter, sister, friend, artist, entrepreneur. It helps me gain insight and perspective from people who don't necessarily think, act, or believe as me. So I said all of that to say, know who you are and be willing to share with and learn from others, because no one is above learning, just as no one is above teaching. Everyone's a teacher, no matter if you want to be or not. I hope that answered the question, how my message goes further.
It definitely did. Thank you very much for that. We're going to push on to the next one here. The next question we have, and I'll start it off and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Wolfe. How does one identify and assess community, audience, or tribe? Whichever one's important. How does one identify and assess community, audience, and tribe? I'll answer briefly, then we'll turn over to Ms. Wolfe and then over to Mr. West for this one in reverse order. For me, identifying and assessing community is all three of those things are tricky things. I believe that community is what we are raised in. Some people argue it's a society, but community is what we are raised in. So that's not necessarily a thing that you choose. It's your nature and nurture. I was born in Cincinnati. I was raised in that community. I was raised in Dayton. I was raised in a specific income bracket. So on and so forth, drug community, that kind of drug culture, et cetera. So that's a community. Then I had another one when I went to school. I went to church on the west side of where I grew up. So that was a different community there. My artistic community came much later. My artistic community came probably pushing into my 30s. And then that was a poetry-based community. That was poetry, theater, live musicians, bands. So those conversations were very different than where I grew up and who I grew up with. But I still wouldn't necessarily say that I had found my audience or tribe. While there was an audience listening to me, it was not necessarily, quote unquote, my audience. In other words, the people that my message was for. They're the people who paid to come to the open mics, paid to come to the slams. I just so happened to be there. Now, my audience and tribe started becoming defined for me as an artist as I traveled and toured and noticed who was coming out for the show, who spoke to me after the show, who repeatedly came out because I was a performer at the show. So that started to define my audience. And I discovered they were people who were wanting to be challenged. They were people who appreciated a particular style or form of poetry, I guess. More of a narrative-based style, more of a high performance in style became my audience. Now, identifying tribe, and the other two panel members, you can choose to answer all three of these or any one of them. You don't like however you want to do this, up to you. Tribe to me is a very different thing. I wasn't used to using the phrase until I attended a writer's retreat that was a focus on Black writers, more so in the South. And a big thing they would say to identify each other walking around at the writer's retreat would say, "I see you, tribe." So whether you knew the person's name or not, it was, "I see you, tribe. I see you, tribe member, part of my tribe." Being a third generation only child, that's a weird thing to hear. It's a very strange thing to hear because my tribe has always been me and my mom and a dog. That's it for most of my life. So anything more than that became awkward and strange. But what I discovered, what it meant is where you belong. So I discovered that while I am a poet, definitely a poet, spoken word artist, poetry slam, what have you. My initial passion and love is the stage, is theater, is film, and is television. I am an actor by nature. I'm a screenwriter by nature. I'm just a translator of experiences. So I chose at some point to do that through poetry. But my tribe is one of the reasons I moved to Los Angeles, because I believe my tribe is in the film and TV industry. So the stories I want to tell and the way in which I want to, the module I want to put them in to share them was more of a, this one stage isn't quite enough. It needs to be a TV, a movie, a bigger thing. I can't tell this in 3-minute poems in a slam. I can't do it in a 10-minute feature at an open mic. I can't do it in a 15-minute show. So it became, well, this needs to be a bigger thing. So my tribe, my audience, my future audience is in a bigger space or stage, COVID notwithstanding. So therefore my tribe are people who put those productions on. So I've learned that my community of poets is great, but they're not my tribe. My tribe is a different thing. That's just for me. So repeat it. How does one identify and assess community, audience, and or tribe? Any one of those three things or all three things? I think we're still doing fairly decent on time. And we'll start off with Miss Wolfe.
First of all, I believe that one identifies their tribe by first identifying who they are. You and Obbie talked about this before in cultivating your message, and I also was talking about it, about how you must first understand who you are and who you're anchored to and what your anchor is on and what your foundation is, before you begin to look for, before you get to look further than your community. My community, like you explained before, is, you know, how you were raised. So I'm a Black woman raised in the rural South. Boom. The more adjectives we give that, the more monikers, the more things we add to it, the smaller my community gets. So I know that the term finding yourself is pretty cliche, but in all honesty, it's true. So if you don't, because if you don't stand up for something, you'll fall for anything up to and including someone else's version of you. So, well, someone else's version of you, your truth, and your history. So as much as it may hurt, sometimes it's important to explore the triggers and traumas that have caused you to move and act and respond to things the way that you do. And that will in turn help you, ties into the previous question, cultivate your message and actually find your tribe. So I'm a creative professional, and one of the communities that I belong to is the poetry community. But I'm a writer and a visual artist. I'm not a slammer. Like that's not the part of the community. That's not my tribe. That's not the circle that I move in. I like to attend slams. You know, I like talking with poets who do slam. But as far as doing all of the things involved to slam, I believe that we write for two different reasons. Like people have different reasons that they are artistically inclined or that they share their art. And mine is more so for the message. I'm not particularly interested in anything other than the message. The audience that I seek to reach is anyone that is moved by spirit and truth. So the people that I seek to see, the people that are a part of my tribe, racism cannot exist in the space that I seek to occupy. So we're all on a mental wave here. So people like to say often that I'm 1 in a million. I've always thought that math was very off in terms of community and tribe, because if you're 1 in a million and my little county has 8 million people in it, this is just estimation because I'm a creative, not a mathematician. There's 8 million people here and you're 1 in a million. You should be able to link up by logic. You should be able to move in the same circle that you're moving, on the same path that you're on, to link up with those other 8 people to create. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you will have direct communication. You might be indirectly taught by that person, or you might be indirectly influenced by that person, but your tribe will come into contact with you, giving you some sort of confirmation as to what and where you're supposed to be going and what you're supposed to be doing. So if I continue on the path of creativity I'm on, we're bound to bump into each other, and connection is inevitable. So yeah, that's my answer. I hope it. That's
Perfectly
I
fine.
identify my tribe and community. Yes.
Awesome. Mr. West. How does one identify and assess community, audience, and or tribe?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. I'll address all three of these. I'll go one at a time. What I identify as my community are those things that has had the largest influence on developing me into who I am today. So I've narrowed that down to two things. One is my race, being Black. And there's a lot of common experiences, common living conditions that align with that race. And being Black has, and traveling the world, being in the military and traveling the world has shown me that race is a community before human is, right? So there's a lot of ways that I conduct myself today. There's a lot of things, a lot of ways that I handle things based on my race. I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, it wasn't uncommon for me to walk down the street and out of nowhere there's a flashing light in my face, and then I'm asked to be, or I'm put on the ground or something to that nature, and then I'm frisked and then I'm let go. It wasn't uncommon. It was like at least once a month something like this would happen. So then I joined the military, and I'm in the military and I get off the bus and it's basic training. And as we're exiting the bus, these drill sergeants are yelling at the top of their lungs, get down, get down, get down. They're yelling and they're having people do push-ups. And there's people who are crying that couldn't make it through the first and second day because of that. Where me, it was kind of tickling, because where I'm from, they didn't ask you to get on the ground. They put you on the ground, and it wasn't to do push-ups. So you're asking me to get on the ground to do an exercise? This is entertainment. So I didn't take it seriously. So because of my community, where I came from, that was easier for me to deal with versus somebody who grew up in a different community, that was torture to them. So my community, as bad as it may have seemed when I was in it, it did a lot to harden me so that later on, certain things in life that people couldn't remain composed through seemed like nothing. So that's the first part of my community that has had a large influence on who I am today. The second part is I'm an artist. Later on in life, when I was introduced to poetry, instantly it became my wings. Like I left Earth and never came back. And now that has given me a method, a vehicle to talk about that previous community, that aforementioned community being Black. Art has given me the avenue to now talk about that in ways that people who don't have those experiences can now understand. So when they see me act a certain way, they see me respond or not respond a certain way, how I message it and explain it to them gives them an understanding of why that can be. So I identify my communities as being two, being Black and the other being an artist. I recite poems more than I hold conversations. So most of my dialogue comes from reciting poems. I would rather recite poems than talk. So that's what's second for. That's the second part of my community. Next is my audience, and my audience pretty much is consistent with what Ed spoke about earlier. It's who I notice is consistently coming back to consume my message. At some point, everybody will hear the message at least once, but when you come back, voluntarily come back consistently to consume this message, and now you take the message and you feel like the message is valuable enough for you to share it with other people, you have now become my audience. You've become my audience, and you've become my limb, or you become my extension to a point. How I can reach with arms, you become another arm of what I do, and now you're spreading it to people who I don't have immediate access to, and now they become my audience. So that's how I identify my audience, who's repeatedly coming back on a consistent basis to consume what I have. And if I narrow that down a little bit more, these people tend to be advocates, people who believe in abuse reduction. These people seem to be intellectuals, people who believe in creative writing and having a very colorful way of expressing something, people who are just fascinated by the manipulation or the relationship created with words, right? So that tends to be my audience. And now my tribe is a little different. My tribe is my inner circle. My tribe is the people who I will talk to when I don't want to talk to nobody, right? When you absolutely don't want to talk to nobody, but you need to talk to somebody, that's who my tribe is. It's my inner circle. It's when I don't want to be bothered, who I will still want to be bothered with, like my daughter. Those individuals is what I consider my inner circle. This is who I'll give my all to, and leave me with nothing left in support of them. So that concludes my answer. Again, thank you, Ed.
Very good. Y'all keep me on my toes today. I like this one. The next one. And I'll start off, and then I'll go, and then we'll turn over to Obbie, and then Miss Wolfe. How do we educate those outside of our arts, or outside of the arts period? How do we educate those outside of our arts to see value and need for them? Awesome, thank you very much. And I'll do this in two ways. You can answer how you want. But outside of our art, I'm very curious to hear, based upon the assignment we had the other night, I'm very curious to hear your responses in terms of outside of the art of poetry, but still to people who claim that they support performing arts. And then people in general to see the value in them. How do we educate those outside of our arts to see value and need for them? I believe it's a twofold thing. Getting other art forms to appreciate our art form as one. The trick to it is, the old joke is, the great thing about poetry is anybody can do it. The horrible thing about poetry is anybody can do it. Therefore, to create a value system of it becomes difficult because everyone has a poem at home. Everyone had that class, had that crush, and they wrote something for her, and then it becomes a problem because they go, oh, well, I can do that. No different than we see a comedian and go, well, I have a friend that's funny. I've told a joke. I can do that. We've all held a basketball in our hand or some kind of sport. We go, I can do that. And when it comes to the spoken word, it gets devalued oftentimes because it's assumed to be an easy thing when it's not. The panel members and myself, all three of us have been tested and tried around the country. It's one thing, as Chris Rock once said, it's one thing to tell a joke to your friends and they find it funny. It's a different thing when you can go to 50 different states and you know for a fact they're going to laugh at that same joke. That elevates it to a different thing. So how do we educate them is to get them to see poetry, for me, to see poetry in places where they did not think it exists. If you watch recently, America's Got Talent winner was poetry, the $1 Million. Inauguration, poet who came out of slam. The poet who did America's Got Talent came out of slam. We have Pulitzer Prize winners now. We have National Book Award winners now who came out of poetry, slam, and spoken word, and are Black people specifically. So is there value in it? I would assume so. 80% of all Super Bowl commercials this past year, the most expensive airtime, including election years, the most expensive airtime there is Super Bowl time. 80% of those commercials had prose or poems or just flat out poems in them. Listen to what Bruce Springsteen did. A couple other people, it was just poetry this year. So there's a value in it. It's getting people to see that it doesn't necessarily equal someone just standing on stage with a microphone bellowing at you. We've been digesting poetry for years. Every bit of advertising, log lines or poems, because they're no different than haikus. Songs, the more digestible songs. Iambic pentameter by Shakespeare is one of the greatest writers ever. It's just poetry. That's all it is. So I'm going to shut up because I want to hear more of their responses and keeping track of the time we have left, because I can go on about this one, but I really want to hear them. So we will start off with, I forgot what I said first, Miss Wolfe. No, I said Mr. West. I'm sorry. How do we educate those outside our arts to see value and need for them?
Okay, thank you, Ed. I appreciate that. I'm gonna restate the question to make sure I understand it. How do I convince others that the product that I have is valuable to them? This might be my favorite question of tonight, and this is a battle that's consistent in any other industry. Right? Apple sits down at the round table and they ask themselves, how do I make this phone better than my competitors, or better than the other phones that are doing the same thing that I'm doing? So first, I think what they come up with is, well, I have to do the same thing they're doing, but I have to do it better. So how does that pertain to poetry? Everyone has an influencer. There's a group of people who their influence comes from a religious leader. There's a group of people where their influences come from family. Some people influencers are coaches, athletic coaches. And then you have a group of people who are influenced by artists. So now we have to figure out how to deliver the same message that other performance arts or other message deliverers are delivering, but better. And the information that they have in is absolutely important, but the way they're delivering it is putting people to sleep. So now I have to show up and deliver that exact same message with the same level of accuracy, but now in a way that you're going to stay awake and listen. So now I've been chosen over the lecturer. So I think we absolutely have to find ways to do the same thing that the people, the art forms adjacent to us are doing, but do it in a way that's just as effective or better. The same thing that I'm sure phone companies do is they say, how can we take some of the features that these other phones have, but now let's do them simultaneously. Like we're going to shoot the video, but while the video is shooting, you can also take a picture while the video is going. So now you have a still shot of that moment. Same thing with poetry. You have a poet, you have a comedian, you have a lecturer, you have an actor, you have all these things. And then you have Ed Mabrey, where he adds comedy within the poem. He adds theater within the poem because he's dancing. He had lecture within the poem with the valuable information. So now everything that you got in these other elements individually is all in his thing. How do you not gravitate towards that? So we have to show that we can do everything everybody else can do, but we can put it into one thing versus you having to go out and get it separately. And the next thing is I think we have to do it consistently. Everyone has brought a phone that worked great for a month. In the second month, you wanted to fight it. I don't know how many phones I've had that I wished it had nerves so I could hurt it, right? It wasn't consistent. But when you can do this consistently and you continue to provide a product of value in a consistent basis, then I think we convince consumers, I'll say consumers or audiences to gravitate towards what we have. That concludes my question. Thanks, Ed.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And the same thing, we will now turn over to Ms. Wolfe. How do we educate those outside of our arts to see value and need for them?
Okay, so as a freelance, independent contractor, I think my answer is gonna fall somewhere between you and Obbie's, but it's pretty simple, 3 words. For me, do the work. Do the work inside the art form, whether you're a poet, whether you're a writer, whether you're a performer, whether you're an advocate, whether you're an actor, whether you're a teacher, do the work. Do what is necessary to keep you up to date on your specific craft. Be the example inside the be the example outside the art form. This goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you may be the only God that some people get to see, correct? So you need to, in whatever your professional realm of creativity is, you need to be the example of professionalism when you're in that realm and when you're standing outside of it. Because we live in a society where everyone's shouting their opinion to prove that it matters, but no one does it consistently enough to change anything. That goes to Mr. West's point of putting content, well, not content, being consistent in your message and being consistent in your delivery and being consistent in your study of your craft. I'm sorry. Passion can move people, but it takes perseverance and a certain tenacity to keep the party going way past midnight. Sorry, I'm pretty country, so I have a whole lot of like little country idioms. So what I mean by that is I can be passionate about mothering, poetry, teaching, speaking, writing, but I have to do the work of all of the above to keep the party going, to keep the train moving. I can't just be a good mom on Monday and take Tuesday through Thursday off and think I'm going to hop back on the train and my kids are going to listen to me on Friday. Same thing with poetry. You can't be on fire for writing on Monday because you have an idea, but on Tuesday it's just like, yeah, I'm not really feeling it. On Wednesday you're like, oh, I want to get into it, but I can't. So that's number one. You have to be consistent. And number two, to speak to Mr. West's point, is move like you, not like them. And if you're a BIPOC, if everyone on this panel is Black, Mr. West spoke of Mr. Mabrey's ability to encompass so many different art forms in a poem. And that is what we all, well, I don't know if we all aspire to be that way, but professional creatives should all aspire to be able to present their message in many different ways at many different times, and sometimes all at the same time, just to reach their audience. So just stand, and I think that kind of falls back into educating yourself on your art form and your craft and what you're doing. Oh, we're running out of time. Hold on. So, so like I said, number 2 is move like you, not like them. Black people have been creating value out of thin air for forever. So whatever the thought, whatever the idea, whatever it is that you have in your heart to try it. The worst case scenario is you'll go viral. That's it.
Okay. We'll do this last one, and I think we'll be jumping over to the Q&A portion, which they have some questions already ready. And this one's a little trickier, so I think we have just enough time for it. And I'll keep my portion short and let you guys touch on this. Is how does education and/or higher learning play a role? And we left the question open when we initially did this, but as it would apply to being, in this case, being a Black creative professional, how does education and higher learning play a role? Now, it's not so much from the aspect of your level of education, because everyone on the panel is very intelligent and smart. It's how do the institutions play a role? Or is there? Do you believe that institutions, let's do it this way. Do you believe that institutions have or should have a responsibility towards shifting a focus or shedding more of a light on the performing arts? Yeah, I think that's actually an appropriate way to do that. Do you feel that places of higher learning, and we can even include high school in that, but places of higher learning should play a role in the performing arts and showing the importance and relevance of it? Yes, that's what I believe we'll do that way. And I'll give my 10 cents on that, and then we'll let Ms. Wolfe go from there. And my 10 cents on the question I rephrased would be yes. I think the public school system, it's been a proven fact, the public school system in America has went downhill the more it's removed arts out of it. Even sports, but way more so arts. It's just a statistical fact that schools that have more arts normally have higher GPAs for their students. They are better critical thinkers. They are more prepared for the real world and more prepared for post-secondary education. I believe the same thing with colleges. No matter what you're going to get your degree in and what your prerequisites are, they have shown that those who take a focus in the arts, especially the performed arts, even visual, but more so the performed arts, normally have higher GPAs and are more ready for the real world, and they're more well-rounded individuals. So I believe that because of that, I believe those institutions have a responsibility to shed light and to shine light on that. And then the default of that would be Black, Indigenous, and people of color are normally often left in the background in those situations. They are shown through the redlining of America that we end up going to schools that can afford less, and the first thing that gets cut are the arts. So therefore, by default, we are stuck behind doing so. So yeah, a light should be shed to show the importance of arts in secondary education, and then should be shed even more so to show how it's of value. The more well-rounded a human being, the less likely they are to commit certain crimes, for lack of a better term, but the less likely they are to be in certain demographic lifestyle situations. Let's put it that way. So then that person, that scary monster that we are portrayed to be, that is never the case, is less likely to be so if they had the same opportunity as their white counterparts. So wouldn't you want, if you truly are afraid of that monster being created in this America, then wouldn't you want to give them the opportunity to be a quote unquote better individual, to not have that as your excuse? The best way to remove it isn't to put your money towards jails, it's to put your money towards the arts in schools. So that'd be my very short response on that. And we're going to turn this over to Ms. Wolfe.
Thank you so much. So for me as a mother, this question is, I'm passionate about it because I have an 11-year-old and I have a 4-year-old son. My son is very active, and my 11-year-old is very creative. And they do not have these outlets. I'm saying a lot. They do not have these outlets either in the elementary field or in her middle school field, and they absolutely do not have anything other than band in high school. And they have an art class, but it's just a class. And I remember that when I was younger, art was a staple. It was like something that you did every week. And it was to give you an outlet to be creative. You had kids who had things that were going on at home that they couldn't talk about freely. So art gave them an opportunity to express that, and for people to look and understand, get a little glimpse, a little window into what they were going on. Now, as far as high school and liberal and not liberal arts colleges, but colleges in general, I believe that there should be such a responsibility on these teachers and institutions of higher learning to offer these things. Number one, colleges, because they can afford them. You should be able to place creative professionals in positions to do their job and influence people in the sphere that they are comfortable in and they're able to do it in. That's number one. Number two, you, like Mr. Mabrey was talking about, don't you want to give these children another outlet besides sports, hitting things and people and balls? Don't you want to give them a creative outlet? And then the final thing, the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because I was that kid in high school that was told writing will never amount to anything. You can be a poet or a dreamer all day long, but it'll never get you any further than where you are now. And because of that, I don't regret the path that I took in life, but I took a much different path to have a story to tell, because teachers told me, hey, this isn't going to work. Music, poetry, writing anything other than research papers, it's never going to benefit you. Get your heads out of the clouds. But I wish I had a professor or a teacher or just someone to say, hey, stick with that. It'll pay off in the end. Go to college for that. Learn about that. I think it's so important. And if you don't have it in the college as curriculum, then it's definitely, or high school as curriculum, then it's definitely important to have as extracurricular activity or something that they can get involved in outside of school. So that's how I feel about that.
Thank you very much. And we will let Mr. West finish up our last 3 minutes before we go to the Q&A portion.
Okay, hey, thanks, Ed. I'll kind of press the gas pedal on this for the sake of time. My quick answer is yes. I think it's very important that educational system consider the arts. Educational system is made to educate and to give children options as to what they want to pursue as an adult. And if we take any topic in school and we line that topic up against arts and we see what the counterpart is as a profession, art is one of the most highly monetized things that there are. I guarantee you, Will Smith makes more than any English teacher. So to take that option away from a child when it's the most paid for profession, one of the most paid for professions there is, doesn't make any sense. Let's be honest. College is to make you marketable. College is to make you marketable. If you have most students in college and you say, listen, you don't even have to study, you don't have to get the education. If you give me this much money, we'll give you a degree. They'll pay for that degree because they want to be marketable more than they want the information. So to take the thing that's going to make you the most money away is counterproductive. No difference than we go to school for 12 years from 1st to the 12th grade and we learn how to dissect crickets every year, but we never learn how to balance a checkbook. But then when we get out of college, we never dissect crickets, but we're always trying to manage the checkbook. So it's another concept of you're taking the most important thing away and making something mandatory that's probably not used later. So there's it just makes sense logically to keep art in the educational school system, make it as relevant as possible, not just for the fact that it opens up minds and creativeness is beneficial in a ton of ways, but just for the purpose of school. The reality is the purpose of school is to make yourself marketable afterwards, and to take the highest paid profession away is counterproductive. That concludes my answer. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. To wrap that up in 60 seconds, and then we'll turn this over to the moderators for the Q&A portion. Much like STEM is a huge focus nowadays, which is extremely important and very necessary. Children and students, young people will always find a way to express themselves. And if they feel they're not being heard, they will find a way to be heard, whether it be through drugs, whether it be through seeking love via sex and replacing that love with sex, whether it be through teenage pregnancy rates, which are both the man and woman's responsibility, of course, whether it be through suicide rates, whether it be through gang-related activities, drug-related activities. All those things typically come from the lack of being heard. Demographics aside, and systemic racism aside for a second, they come from not being heard. So you're going to hear them one way or the other. By removing the arts, you're guaranteeing an increase in those things. The increase in arts, and you lower those things because they have another way to express themselves, whether they're happy, sad, upset, angry, feel like the world's not listening, whatever the case is, they have an outlet for that thing. Remove all those outlets and they will find another way to speak. And there will always be the lesser, more dangerous, more criminal activities will always have an open ear and will welcome them in for a way to speak. So I believe the school system, pre and post-secondary, needs to put a premium on keeping that expression alive and offering it as an opportunity. And those communities where those schools exist, having positions, places, and jobs for those people to be employed to show the validity of it. Otherwise, there's no point in getting that degree in that thing if you can't go be employed in it. So on behalf of Ms. Wolfe and on behalf of Mr. West, my name is Ed Mabrey. I want to thank everyone very much for entertaining us and listening to these questions for this portion. We're going to turn over to the Q&A because I know there's some things that have already been stocked up that they're ready for us to tackle and handle.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Terrance Brown, and I serve as Executive Director of School of the Arts, and I'll run the Q&A portion. While we get questions in, I do have some things that'll get us kicked off here. And the first one I'm going to direct right at Mr. West, and everyone else can please chime in if you have something to say in regards to the question. You mentioned earlier that you would love to have someone who is racist do a poem or talk to you about their racism. I'm a firm believer of that, by the way. My last presentation that I did, I wanted to see if I can engage in someone who was from the Ku Klux Klan, because I really would like to know more about what they believe and how they believe it and how that affects me as a person. How do you prepare yourself to hear that information and not put up a wall of defense, but instead put up one of love, that you can receive that information and work with them to maybe find some kind of equitable ground to operate from?
Dr. Brown, I'll start off by saying you present some of the most thought-provoking questions ever. And your expectation for us to answer these without about a week of preparation is unreasonable, but I'll try. I think you prepare yourself by wanting the information. When information is force-fed to you involuntarily, then you may reject it. But when you sincerely want to know in order to create something better or to create a better relationship, then I think you'll be more open-minded to receive it when you sincerely want to know, right? So say if I'm a person, I'm just a general public, and there's a guy or a gal who is a sex offender, right? And this person comes in talking about how they have been able to successfully offend. Me as the general public or someone who may have been abused by that, being force-fed that information can be extremely victimizing. But if I'm law enforcement and I want to hear this, because you're going to now help me catch the next one, I'm going to listen with a less defensive mind. I'm going to listen with an open mind. I'm going to listen with the intent to learn, because you're about to help me catch the next one. So I think you prepare yourself by wanting that information, by really wanting it, so you can make a change. If you don't want it, then I think the individuals who was force-fed to are the ones who will naturally build a defense. I hope that addresses your question.
It does.
If I had 2 weeks, I probably would have gave you a better question.
No, that's great. Ms. Wolfe, do you want to say something in line with this? Mr. Mabrey, you want to tackle something?
Just briefly, it's a tricky thing, because the first thing is getting past the anger. Because time and time again, we as Black people have been asked to swallow that anger and listen. So to have the conversation, there has to be patience on both ends, I guess, is the first thing. Second is you're discussing unraveling several hundred years of conditioning. on both sides. I recently heard someone say something to the effect of, we need to discuss racism in America and white people need to talk to white people about it. And then they said in turn, and then black people need to talk about the effect of racism on black people and how we've internalized it in order to even have that conversation. So to sit there and have it, yeah, I could definitely do that. The way you sit there is to understand that you're not trying to prove the other person wrong, because it's not the other person that's wrong. It's the learning they've received that's incorrect. So it's getting to the core of, where did this come from? Who taught you this? And then why at this point in your life have you chosen to still accept it? I believe in terms of the unpacking of it. If I see someone of a certain age, well, it becomes a, you should know better. You should kind of see like, this is a human indecency. So then what caused you to accept it blindly, even at this point now, would be my thing. So I'm going to pause my vitriol towards that person and go, why are you still co-signing this? You know, why is this Confederate statue still here? And what it means to people, how it triggers black people in your community. I get it. That was your great grandfather. But is that weight on a scale worth more to you still in present day than how you see it affects 1,000 people in your community? You know, and if your answer is yes, then why? What about your memory and recollection are you holding on to so tight that you can't let this thing go? Right? What was it just in, is it Mississippi or Alabama? It might be Alabama, which would be awkward now. I'm trying to think, where yoga can't be taught in schools. And now they've finally said, well, we're going to take that off. That's a law. Like, think about that. Yoga, the most peaceful exercise, meditative thing, can't be taught in schools, was a law. They are starting to loosen up on that law. But one of the things they're still holding on to with it is that it's in Alabama, yeah, that if you do get instructed, you have to teach it in English. It's like, but it's yoga. It's a stretch. It's a, it's a downward dog. It's an upward cat. It's a spiral moon. It's a figure eight. It's a whatever you want to call it. And they said, well, we'll loosen up a little bit, but you have to do it in English. And you can't discuss, it has to be an American-based form of yoga. It can't have connections to Hinduism or yogis. Right? So I'm assuming you're not going to call it yoga, because the word in of itself would take it outside of America instantly. So there's going to become an Alabama-esque version of yoga, I'd assume. So it was that kind of thing. Like, what happened where you're still holding on tight to this? What did yoga do? What does it represent to you in a school? So when they've shown that if you have children meditate, that they do better on tests and they retain more and they're less stressed out. If you have them exercise, and a load-based exercise like yoga is something they can all deal with, then what about why? So again, so your kids that go to your schools, I must if I was speaking to those politicians, your kids go to those schools, and your belief system about some antiquated version of weird racism, of keep anything that's not American out of your school system, that's worth it to you? So that would be my kind of thing in terms of the conversation. Sorry.
Now, I think we could probably go another session just on that. Everyone, if you have questions, remember, use that Q&A function. There is no question that is out of reach. We may not have time to answer it all, but we can definitely get you some information. If you want to ask questions after today, you can email arts@una.edu, and we'll be sure to get those to Mr. Mabrey, Ms. Wolfe, and also Mr. West, and we will get that to us. So here is something else that was mentioned earlier, Mr. Mabrey. You talked about planting seeds and then allowing them to grow, but sometimes you don't have to be sure that you have to be there to all the time be there with the seeds. They can kind of grow by themselves. It started to make me think, the seeds that you're planting, are there ones that you have nurtured and built and constructed and genetically put together yourself? Or do you feel like as a society, we've been given certain seeds that's okay to grow. And as artists, we're expected to grow those seeds that's been prescribed to us. And if so, how do we train a new generation of creatives to preach beyond that choir and to grow their own seeds?
Hamilton, Tyler the Creator, Kendrick Lamar, Childish Gambino, Brandon Leak, Amanda Gorman. Those are answers to your question in terms of, yes, we are told that we have a handful of seeds to keep the metaphor going. Oh, you're Black and an artist? Well, then here's your lane, and stay in that lane. When we discuss the performing arts and the validity of Black people or poetry being a valid part of the theater system in most countries, they don't see it that way, but the Black dollar is necessary in those spaces, right? Yeah, the Black dollar is necessary in those spaces, so therefore Black people are necessary in those spaces. Black art is necessary in those spaces. How we get out of it is simply by starting to push those norms. Hamilton being an example of that, where majority of the people that go to see it aren't Black people, just because we're not the majority of the country. So it's just a numbers game. We're technically valid, but they validate us in our spaces. If every Black person in the world purchased a hip hop album, every white person in the world did not. Hip hop artists could not make a living. So they literally need people outside their space, right, to make those purchases in order for them to make a living. But that's still them going, well, we'll accept it as long as you do that there. Beyonce with 28 Grammys, making history, all of a sudden shows, well, we can push beyond. Darius Rucker from Hootie and the Blowfish is one of the greatest country music Western writers of all time. He quit singing it and just started writing it for other people. But they said something like 1 out of every 5 songs here in country music was written by him or his people. So how we get that to be shown is by showing Kendrick Lamar has a Pulitzer now for a hip hop album. So you can no longer call it an invalid art form or a street thug, ghetto, drug, welfare, violence, misogynistic only art form, right? You start getting into those spaces and places and then showing your work through their lens, I guess for a better way to put it, or your work through their machine. Hamilton is Black work, for lack of a better term. It's not Black, it's BIPOC work in a white machine. Technically, if you look at what some of what the creators of South Park have done, they actually hold up a mirror to white America, and there's white people doing it. If you went to watch the Book of Mormon, it shows the fallacy of the ideology of not Mormons, of white people going, we're going to go to Africa and we're going to save these heathens and these savages from themselves by sprinkling some God on them in the old-fashioned American way. And they show the fallacy of that. But they chose to do it as a musical specifically because of, like, these are the people we're trying to speak to. We're not trying to speak to people who watch South Park. They already get the joke. They get the hypocrisy in America. We want to get on Broadway to get that white collar crowd, that purchase ticket, I support the arts crowd, to come to our show and rub their faces in this, and they'll still be faced with it. And it's one of the biggest awarded musicals of all time. The Book of Mormon by the creators of South Park. Like, and no one really brings that up, like the irony and the joke of that. The same guys who did Cartman and Mr. Pooh and Mr. Hanky also have one of the greatest musicals in the history of American theater, right? Which we keep in mind was originally called Broadway, was called The Great White Way, right? So it's getting us, but now one of those primary shows is Lion King, which is an Africanized, animalized story discussing technically the Black hierarchy of a monarch system. That's all it is. If you don't believe me, then that's exactly, every time we watch Black Panther, one of the highest grossing movies of all time, that's just the Lion King story told through Wakanda. It's literally the same story told through Wakanda. You know, so To answer you, so we are there. The stories are there, but it's getting us into those spaces, opening those doors, and in getting people who are not us to see that value. So it's where when someone says, I'm not a racist, I think racist, I'm not a bigot, I'm anti these things, what they're saying is they're pro-America. If America really is a melting pot, then anti-racism is pro-American. So then you get those quote unquote black shows in, aside from just February. Those things should be ongoing, permanent. Theater was once considered the American dance theater. Literally, the name of it was like, we'll just call it the America because you represent America. A gay black man created a thing that a president at one point said, you need to go be our ambassador, go dance in other countries and show how much progress we've made here. And we see how that went. It's still now a great legacy, but the hypocrisy of how he was treated, those kind of things. So yeah, so I believe there's a lot to it. And I think that's a big way of doing that is to just start presenting what we have now with some of the artists I mentioned, and you show them they've opened up doors that now, as we said the other day on Tuesday, now that door is open, you can't close it anymore because they took the hinges off the door. You can't say hip hop's not a credible form. It's received a Pulitzer. You can't say it's not, we have the most Grammys ever. So you can't say a black woman can't do this, what Jay-Z's done on the business realm and the hip hop realm. So you can't say these things aren't possible anymore because we've opened those doors up. A black woman's voice is not necessary. Tell that to our current vice president or to the lady who did the inauguration and then trying to did a poem at the Super Bowl. So you're gonna tell us that black voice, and not just black voices, but that means black writing, because all of these things were penned by the people you saw doing them. So by default, black art has to be a viable, credible thing.
We have two questions, and I think for the interest of time, these will be the last two that we take. And the first one is from Dr. Solomon. The next one's going to be from Ms. Monica Collier. Dr. Solomon said, Mr. Mabrey, you talked about yoga, and you said, let's rebrand it and just call it stretching. How do you feel about the potential of being tacit or complacent in an effort to work within the system? And also, where do you strike the balance between working within the constraints and fighting those constraints and picking battles, et cetera?
Great question. I'll keep this answer short. I'll just ramble with that last one because it got me excited. Anytime that you feel, and this is an odd answer, but anytime that you feel those constraints become restraints, the moment they start to constrict you, that is when you need to push back or push outside the system. And it's a matter of finding a balance between the two. You work within that system in as much as that system proves it is willing to dismantle parts of itself that harm those within it. If you're, when planes first started, when they first started flying commercial planes, airplanes flew at a lower airspace, and turbulence was horrible. The plane rides were like death machines. There was turbulence, it jumped up and down a lot. You had drinks spilled, people were scared to death to fly. Everybody could smoke on the plane. Everybody was drinking on the plane. It was just a horrible, horrible experience. So you literally had a machine that was being marketed that was damaging the people within the machine. And someone said, well, let's do some studies and research, or this isn't going to last. We're not going to keep filling up these planes with people. Someone said, hey, if we fly a little higher, there's no turbulence and it's a smoother flight. And if it's a flight, people are more comfortable. If they're more comfortable, they want to do this more often. And it's just, that's the airline industry. It's just that simple. So if you're within a system and you say, well, this system is sexist, misogynistic, toxic masculinity, it has a history of sexual assault within it, whatever the case may be, you make it to where those people who commit those atrocities are uncomfortable. You include more people who want to fight against those things, and you root that evil out. The difficulty becomes where rooting that evil out can cause uncomfortable conversations. It causes people in the boardroom who look the same color and come from the same blue blood black background that have to have conversations with their friends and their buddies they've had for decades and sometimes generations and say, hey, you're a problem. We're not saying you have to go, we're saying you have to change. And that's what people don't get when it comes to things like racism and oppression, things like that. We're not saying get out. No Black person is telling anyone else to leave the country. That's stupid. We're saying you have to change. And what we're getting in return is, oh no, I'm not going to change. Well, we both can't exist here. So now what do? That's what it comes down to. So in those places, it's a matter of when you feel it's being constraining, then you speak up. You know, hey, I think I'm getting a lot of pushback against an idea or a plan that works. And the only reason someone says, well, you can work at the University of Northern Alabama, but if you identify as a woman, your skirt can't be anything longer than 1 inch. That's a stupid policy. And if women and men start pushing back against it and go, hey, this is wrong, their genitalia is just going to be out and exposed. And the person who made the rule goes, nope, I don't see that as a problem. Oh, then you have to go. It's an obvious issue. You know, there's no hard conversation. You have to go. And whatever you take with you becomes a hard part. We have to be willing to lose. Are we willing to lose? Is the NFL willing to lose a sponsor and all that sponsor's money? The answer has to be yes. It has to be, we will lose that sponsor and their money because we simply don't want to be associated with those things, and we'll believe that we'll make it up in another fashion. You know, it just has to be that case. Yeah, that's just me for that. It has to be that case. So I believe that you can do it. You just have to be very vigilant in your process. Like Obbie West said earlier, stay constant. Consistency is important. And within that, be willing to challenge that system. And we need more people within those machines to challenge the machine, even if it means understanding that their personal way of life might adjust. And that's where we come into having problems is everybody wants to be an activist until it costs them something. That's not activism. That's social media activism, because it doesn't cost you much to talk about things online. Once it costs you something, then everyone tightens up. True ally doesn't mind paying that price. That's it.
Thank you. Our last question here, Ms. Wolfe, I want you to start off, and Mr. West, you can chime in if you would like. We talk about, are the arts the vehicle to create an America reflective of its entire population? Are the arts the vehicle to create an America reflective of its entire population?
Everybody going? Nobody going? Nobody saying anything? Okay. I believe that the arts and creative professionals at large are tomorrow's new leaders. We are the people who will pave the way or provide the solutions to problems that have plagued us for generations. If only the people will listen. Does that make sense? If only you're willing to reach beyond your community and your tribe to mentally connect with people who are like you to solve the problems in your area. So I believe that the arts are a key foundation in uniting not just America, but globally. We all know the power of music and its ability to bring together people from different demographics. We all know the power of movies to express ideas and like I said before, give you windows and glimpses into the lives of people that you never would have come in contact with and perspectives. So I believe that each person, Black, Indigenous, person of color, throughout the world has, as a creative professional, has not just an opportunity, but a God-given mandate to educate in their sphere of influence people about what is going on with them, in them, around them, and bring knowledge to it.
All right, Mr. West, do you want to add something in?
Yes, I'll first regurgitate the question to make sure I understand. Are you asking, is the arts the best vehicle in order to hold the mirror in front of America's face?
Yes, basically, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think it is. I say it is because art is universal. Everyone isn't into sports. A lot of people don't watch news. There's a lot of different mediums that a lot of people don't indulge in, but you can't find a large group that don't indulge in some facet of art. So when you're trying to hold a mirror in front of someone's face, you have to first find a medium that's going to reach that person. And if we ask, what's the medium that has the widest reach? It's art. Not only does it have the widest reach, it has the largest emotional impact. And emotion is a call of action for people. Emotion is what drives us. That's the reason Ed, he said, the stain of something. When he was referring, the stain of the human, or something said, he was referring to something we all have, is emotion. So if you find a vehicle that is most widespread and it taps on something that everyone has, it seems like the no-brainer. It's absolutely the vehicle that is best suited to hold a mirror in front of America's face.
Thank you. We're approaching the end of time, but I do want to just thank you all so much for agreeing to be here with us, and we look forward to our in-person conference coming up in the fall, and hope that you all have a presence in some way. I do want to thank Dr. Andrea Hunt and Ms. Alyson Bergner for at our Mitchell West Center of Social Inclusion. They have been our partners, and in the words of Dr. Hunt, they are about the work, and that's quite evident in everything they do. And we're very thankful for that. I want to thank my team within our office, the School of the Arts team, for always trusting and trying new things, especially for I2E2. It was a concept, it was a vision, and now it's coming to reality. There is one thing that Ms. Wolfe said earlier that I wanted to bring to the forefront. She talked about creating this strong foundation. And I feel that we always have to have a foundation of realism. We do. And a lot of things ground to that, most of it is monetarily. But we should never forget to dream. We should always remember the dream. Dr. King had a dream, and because of his dream, my son can now play with kids of different races and slide down the slide and run and swing. And I can sit in this beautiful office downtown and be able to work with colleagues of different races and ethnicities and cultural backgrounds because he had a dream. His dream became a reality, and so many others. So we must remember to dream. We always have to dream. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to the next thing that's coming up. And stay tuned and check our social media sites. Please look up Mr. West, Ms. Wolfe, Mr. Mabrey. They have a strong social media presence. If you want to engage all of them or part of them, please bring them to your school or your organization and let them tear down some walls because we need it. And if they tear it down, remember the School of the Arts does not have insurance to cover those walls, but but we will definitely support the reconstruction of it. All right. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.